Every day is a good day to fight the system, yeah? Yes. One of those days, it's so good that this song brought in, because one of the days that I just wanted to open my message today was back from a few years ago when some of us, maybe you were there, were protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock. Was anyone there? All right. Well, you heard of it. I know that for sure. Absolutely. And for some of us who are non-native, protesting DAPL was a momentous turning point in the depth of our understanding of what is sacred, who are all our relatives, and what it truly means to be part of the interdependent web of life. And that was certainly my experience. I grew up outside of Duluth, just over the hill from the mighty Gitchigami or Lake Superior, and it's impossible not to feel gratitude, respect, and awe for the power and presence of its deep, cold, fresh waters. Off the dirt road, just a short bike ride from my childhood home, was the exceedingly smaller and gentler Midway Creek, where I searched for crawfish and would lay for hours under the sun on those large, flat, gray rocks that intersected the slow-flowing stream. As an adult, the Mississippi River between St. Paul and Minneapolis has been a backdrop to my daily life. I have lived in Minnesota my whole time on this earth, nourished by its expansive skies, countless bodies of water, and diverse landscapes. And yet, chanting Mini-Wachoni, water is life at Standing Rock, and praying with thousands of people brought me to a threshold from one way of being to another way. Now, I want to be clear. This is not about appropriating indigenous culture or spirituality. Indigenous is a birthright word, and immigrants cannot, by definition, be indigenous. But as Robin Wall Kimmerer, an enrolled member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, writes in Braiding Sweetgrass, maybe this was the threshold, this experience I had at Standing Rock, to me truly becoming what she calls naturalized to place. Being naturalized to place, she writes, means to live as if this is the land that feeds you, as if these are the streams from which you drink, that build your body and fill your spirit. To become naturalized is to know that your ancestors lie in the ground. Here you will give your gifts and meet your responsibilities. To become naturalized is to live as if your children's future matters. To take care of the land as if our lives and the lives of all our relatives depend on it, because they do. Standing Rock inspired so many people. It was precedent-setting, especially for the degree of collaboration it inspired between Native and non-Native people. What started in the spring of 2016, when a handful of Lakota women and youth were quietly setting up the Sacred Stone Camp to protest the pipeline, became the biggest tribally led act of civil disobedience in U.S. history. Standing Rock is where I committed to learning, feeling, and taking deep into my bones this way of relationship, connection, responsibility, and reciprocity. For me, it was a visceral experience of the web of life. In words attributed to Seattle, hereditary chief of the Suquamish and Duwamish nations in the Pacific Northwest, we do not weave the web of life. We are merely strands in it. Whatever we do to that web, we do to ourselves. And for the last century and a half, our modern industrialized society has acted to rip that web to shreds. Our direct human actions have created a planetary emergency, a drastic unbalancing of the earth. The decade before us is the decade that decides. Last month, the United Nations issued a report that tells us once again so plainly that the climate time bomb is ticking. The climate disruption we are experiencing now will continue to worsen with each passing year that we add emissions. We must act more quickly than previously thought, or we will reach ecological tipping points that lock in catastrophic levels of warming. A livable future for all is possible, but only if we take urgent climate action. For me, for many of the people and communities of faith, spirituality, and conscience that I work with in the movement, including, I'm sure, for many of you as well, the climate crisis we're in brings tremendous feelings of loss and grief that can engulf us in hopelessness and even despair. It's easy and natural to wonder whether it's too late. Can we really heal and restore the planet? What real difference can we, ordinary citizens, actually make? These are tender and beautiful and holy questions, and I honor how they stir inside of us. To bring about renewal of the world, I think, we have to have ecological compassion. We put our hands on the earth and in its waters, not as natural resources valued for their usefulness or even their beauty or nourishment, but as a fundamental affirmation of our interdependence with all of life. To bring about renewal of the world, we must also recognize that humans are not in control. We're really not in control. But the one thing we can do is control our relationships to one another and to the earth. As Robin writes, relationship is the most authentic facet of the restoration. Here is where our most challenging and most rewarding work lies, in restoring a relationship of respect, responsibility, and reciprocity, and love. Love is what brings me to you today, because in our collective work for justice, we get the joy, the responsibility, we get to rise up and lift our voices. We speak out grounded by our relationship with others. We speak out grounded by our faith and values that affirms everyone is worthy of dignity and love. Justice is not a cause. Feel how much our heart space can hold when we open ourselves up to what we are really advocating for. Changes that all people need, changes that address intersecting oppressions and harm, changes that must happen within, among, and beyond ourselves. Instead of transactional advocacy, we are acting to transform the world. And that's what I'm inviting us to really deepen into today. Heather McGhee, who's an author and policy advocate, she wrote that inequality and climate change are the twin challenges of our time, and more democracy is the answer to both. Right now, we have an incredible moment before us here in the state of Minnesota. We have a $17 billion budget surplus and a climate-led House, Senate, and Governor's office. A coalition that includes my organization, Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, along with Honor the Earth and other indigenous and environmental groups, have endorsed a legislative platform that puts Minnesota on the green road with a strong local renewable economy that supports vibrant Native and non-Native communities living in right relationship with the land. When we launched this platform at the beginning of the 2023 legislative session, it reflected 5 broad categories of work with real opportunities for progress and change. Some of our proposals didn't make it out of the early legislative process, that just happens. Others received hearings and discussion, but no funding, at least not right now. And others still are moving forward in a variety of ways. And regardless of the status of particular bills or initiatives, I do want to name the 5 categories that we are working under because I think they orientate us toward the changes we need for a more just and thriving Minnesota. They say something about how we love one another, what an equitable and robust economy really means, and how clean air, clean water, and a habitable planet for all should be an irrefutable priority. So here we go, very briefly. The first one, reparations and sovereignty. We must treat land and people as relatives to sustain. Their treatment as resources to extract harms all of us, all today. And what this means is that we center communities most affected by climate change. We invest in clean energy and economic opportunity in low-income communities and communities of color statewide. And we respect tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, and the land and water. Number 2, climate goals and truth-telling. Minnesota's newly enacted law, which took place, in February, I think? This is for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. This is the foundation of our energy transition. But what we have to do now, the task before us, is to ensure the transition is built out, is just, and empowers people and not corporations. We have to keep equity at the forefront, and we must stop greenwashing and promoting false solutions that aren't climate forward or renewable. It's great that this bill passed. This bill has a lot of promise, and it can just as easily be enacted to benefit the corporations and not the people. We can't let that happen. This is way too momentous. Number 3, economic development and just transition. Leveraging federal and state funds will speed the transition to renewable energy with local innovation and workers. And a little later in my message, I'm going to talk about one specific bill that it's critically important and needs your support right now. I'll get to that in just a moment. Number 4, regulatory protection for people, land, air, and water rather than corporate profits. There's so many pieces of our system, such as within the Public Utilities Commission, that if we can pay attention to the regulatory frameworks that those are under, that can have a big impact on whose voice is at the table and what influences the decisions that the PUC makes. Line 3 pipeline through northern Minnesota is a perfect example of how Enbridge's voice certainly got heard. We can make regulatory changes to fix that. And 5, environmental justice. This is the umbrella that holds the entire platform. We must drive change that centers the needs of Indigenous and BIPOC communities. Climate justice and racial justice are intertwined. You cannot have one without the other. There are numerous bills that make up this platform. I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, a policy wonk. And so if you want to know the details about these bills, if you love the nitty-gritty details of the legislative session and how government works and bills and omnibuses and all of that kind of stuff, I'll put you in touch with my colleagues. I'm not the one for that. But I'm just going to drop a few names of some things so that in case you hear about them, you'll go, hey, I remember that Terry person from MNIPL mentioned it. These are bills that have to do with putting solar on all of the schools in Minnesota, expanding the hemp industry, addressing decades of funding neglect for public transportation, having a tribal advisory board on the Public Utilities Commission. Now that would be a novel thing, and there's so many other things. So you can go to the legislative platform page on MNIPL.org or reach out to our policy staff, which are all named on there. They'd be happy to fill in more of the details. But I'm here in Mankato, and your state senator is Nick Frentz. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Senator Nick, I should be proper, Senator Nick is chair of the Energy, Utilities, Environment, and Climate Committee. And right before this committee, as part of an omnibus bill, is a funding for Minnesota Climate Innovation Finance Authority, or MNCFA, Climate Innovation Finance Authority. What that essentially is a green bank. And this bill would be Minnesota's first green bank, a model that's already in 20 other states. A green bank is established using one-time public funding, and you leverage those dollars to generate more private investment, which overcomes huge equity barriers. The problem with so much traditional funding is it just puts in barriers for innovative projects that maybe are a little riskier to a traditional lender, and is able to open up funding channels for these programs to get started. It really benefits both individuals and communities that are oftentimes cut out of the process who really have needs for this. MNCFA is included in both the Senate and House Energy Omnibus bills, but it is underfunded. We need $45 million to really scale up Minnesota's clean energy transition. And so I'm asking you, if you can, today or tomorrow, reach out to Senator Frentz and others voting on the Environmental Natural Resources, Climate, and Energy Omnibus Bill. I have handouts available at the back of the sanctuary as well as downstairs. And if you are online, email me at terry@mnipl.org or reach out to Rita. She'll put you in touch and I'll be happy to get the handout to you. That's my spiel on an action that you can take. I offer that with so much heart and love, and it might sometimes feel strange to have these kinds of conversations talked about from the pulpit. But this is part of the work before us, part of the ways that we live out in real, practical, impactful ways the values and the love that we are trying to bring into the world. This is the work before us. At our January rally that we held at the state capitol, Ashley Fairbanks with the 100% campaign said, "There will be a transition, but it is up to us to ensure that this transition is just, that it happens in a way that honors Indigenous rights and sovereignty, repairs harm, and includes every single Minnesotan." I believe that you, like me, are hungry for justice. We can find nourishment and strength by turning to the earth. The earth teaches us the power of resiliency, of regrowth, of emergence. It roots us and moves us. It brings us back to place, back to wonder and gratitude, back to possibility. The earth is never static. It is always moving, changing, living, dying, transforming. Our call, the earth's call, is simply for us to act in whatever ways we can, big or small. For as Robin writes, action on behalf of life transforms. Because the relationship between self and the world is reciprocal, it is not a question of first getting enlightened or saved and then acting. As we work to heal the earth heals us. Friends, my new friends, blessed are the hungry. May we feed each other with the long spoons of compassion until we are strong enough to feed the part of the world that we can reach. Thank you for being with me and having me be with you in this place today. With gratitude and blessings, amen.
Let's thank Reverend Terry, why don't we? As Reverend Terry extinguishes the sanctuary chalice, please extinguish your chalice at home and say the words with me, which are on your pew card. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.